Next on Unsolved Mysteries. In the Persian Gulf, a tragic mistake. The U.S. Navy downs an Iranian airliner. Hundreds perish. Was this car bombing months later an act of revenge? In the rugged mountains of the Sierra Nevada, a man's mysterious vision guides rescuers to a missing woman. A small-town hero disappears, but not before he scams $3 million out of unsuspecting neighbors. A family searches for their missing son, who was sent to America after World War II. Join me for these 5 stories of crime, deceit, and foul play. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. The Persian Gulf. Summer 1988. The Persian Gulf swarms with U.S. naval vessels and aircraft. Just 3 months earlier, an American ship had been badly damaged by an Iranian mine. The Navy's goal is to protect U.S. oil tankers from increasingly hostile Iranian forces. The centerpiece of the naval presence was the USS Vincennes, a cruiser fully armed with surface-to-air missiles. The captain was Will Rogers. The date, July 3rd.
It started out in a benign fashion. I received a radio call that the USS Montgomery was having some difficulty with Iranian Revolutionary Guard small craft. We were directed by higher authority to develop a tactical picture and relay this information back to Bahrain.
A Navy film crew happened to be aboard the Vincennes and recorded the events of the day. The Vincennes dispatched a reconnaissance helicopter. It is immediately attacked by Iranian gunboats. Captain Rogers sought and received permission to return fire.
What ensued was a rather violent surface engagement between myself, the USS Montgomery, and about 7 small high-speed craft.
At almost the same moment, an unidentified aircraft showed up on the ship's radar screen. The plane appeared to be gathering speed and coming straight toward the Vincennes.
We commenced to issue radio warnings, asking it to divert from its course, heading directly at us. Received no response. In the meantime, the surface engagement continued. When the aircraft had closed to about 12 nautical miles, the decision had to be made, and I chose to engage it with missiles.
The plane was destroyed. But then news came in over the radio about an Iranian passenger plane which had yet to arrive at its destination.
It became obvious to us that something was badly wrong. What the pieces of the puzzle began to add up to was this overdue airliner was the result of the missile engagement, that we in fact had destroyed a civilian airliner.
The men aboard the Vincennes had to face the difficult fact that they were responsible for the death of innocent civilians. 290 passengers aboard a commercial Iranian Airlines flight were dead. Their baggage and personal effects created an eerie wake in the blue waters of the Gulf. The downing of Iranian Air Flight 655 was a tragic error. The flight was not running at its scheduled time, and its pilot ignored calls to identify itself. But some in Iran said the nation would not forgive and claimed the right to revenge. In San Diego, California, Captain Rogers' wife, Sharon, was awakened by a phone call at 1 in the morning.
There was a man on the other end of the phone with a Mideastern accent.
Hello? Yes, it is.
He wanted to know if this was the home of Captain Rogers.
Who is this?
And then he said, "Are you the wife of the murderer?"
Who is this?
My worst nightmare was coming true. At this point, with someone calling me, I thought possibly they know where our home is, they know where I live, and possibly someone's in the city. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the rest of the night.
The Naval Investigative Service was called in to secure the Rogers home. Agents checked the mail and monitored incoming calls. There were no more phone threats, but agents advised Sharon to always keep her car locked in the garage when she was at home. 10 weeks later, in October, the USS Vincennes came home. Sharon Rogers was at the dock to welcome her husband. Even after his return, safety precautions, such as keeping both cars in the garage, continued. Until one night, months later, they arrived home late from a Navy meeting.
We were very tired. We decided not to put the cars in the garage. It was the first night since July 3rd that we had not parked the cars in the garage.
And the only night. The only time.
At 7 o'clock the next morning, Captain Rogers used his wife's van to run an errand.
Will came back to the house. We exchanged a few words. It was time for me to go to work. Got into the van, pulled out of the driveway, took my normal route to school. Everything seemed fine. Pulled up at a red light, and it was then that I heard the explosion. I knew that if I'd ever do anything right, I'd better do this one right, because I realized I didn't have many seconds left before I could get out of that van alive.
Sharon threw open the driver's side door, but forgot she had her seatbelt on.
I jumped from the cab of the van. Then I ran to the curb where a construction worker placed me in the cab of his truck, put his jacket around me. About that time, a policewoman approached me. I told her who I was, that I was the wife of the captain of the Vincennes. She immediately called a halt to everything and told everyone to move away, get away. She then began calling in the Naval Investigative Service, the FBI, everyone else.
An FBI investigation revealed that a large pipe bomb had been strapped underneath the van.
Sharon Rogers was extremely lucky. The blast from the bomb went up just behind her seat, through the roof of the van and out to the right side of the van. The bomb was definitely designed to kill someone. It was not a prank. It was placed underneath the vehicle, located just behind where the driver's seat was.
The FBI learned that 2 months before the bombing, a stranger had been asking questions on the Rogers Street.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Would you happen to know which house the captain lives?
I'm sorry, I don't think I can help you with that.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
A second man waited for him in the passenger seat of a BMW that had California license plates. The BMW was an unusual color, known as bronzette beige.
I think we both fervently hope in the arrest and conviction and ultimate imprisonment of the people responsible for the attempt on Sharon's life.
They need to be imprisoned, and we have to send a very strong message to terrorism that you're just not going to win here in the United States.
The FBI has produced this composite sketch of the man who spoke to the neighbors. He was thin, 5 feet 9 inches tall, with dark eyes and hair and a receding hairline. If you have any information about this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next, she is lost, alone, and facing death in the High Sierra. Then, a cowboy rides to the rescue, guided by a mysterious vision. The Sierra Nevada mountains. Its wild beauty attracts many people to its rugged trails, like Millie McGregor. Despite a mild heart condition, she wouldn't think twice about an all-day, 10-mile trek. But when Millie McGregor set out one Labor Day weekend, she never expected that she would take a wrong turn and her hike would become a life or death ordeal.
It seemed like it started off good, had a good trail, and a ways back, that trail split off to two places, and I picked out the one I thought I should go on. I was probably several hours, maybe more like 3 hours, beginning to climb, and I got chest pain.
Perhaps it was the altitude, perhaps the exertion. But for some reason, Millie's heart medication made her disoriented. Before she knew it, she was lost. The beautiful scenery was now a terrifying maze. As the sun went down, Millie realized that she would be spending the night alone in the wild.
I was kind of relieved knowing that I didn't have to hike anymore. I was worried that my husband would be worried.
That first night, it was terrible. I didn't get any sleep at all that first night. I walked the floor and tried to watch the TV, and I couldn't even do that.
Search and rescue teams sprang into action early the next morning. But after an entire day in the wilderness, there was not one single clue. Millie faced a second night in the bitter cold.
I know the first night I spent a lot of time praying that my husband wouldn't worry. The next night, when I was still there, and I was cold and I was thirsty, I started praying for myself that I would get out of there.
The next day, additional search teams were recruited from neighboring counties. Helicopters equipped with infrared sensors searched from the sky.
By the end of the second day, we still had no clue. No footprints, no dropped clothing, no hits from the dog. There was no sign of Mildred.
With an army of searchers at work, no one counted on a soft-spoken cowboy named Randy Spears to ride to the rescue. Randy lived in the area. However, Randy was so busy that week that he didn't know that a woman was lost in the mountains until the evening of the second day of searching.
There's a lady that's lost?
Yeah.
Randy told us that he never, ever had any kind of psychic or ESP experience. But then, somehow, in his mind's eye, he saw a silhouette of a Sierra peak located 50 miles from his ranch. He just knew with absolute certainty that he would find Millie on the mountain's southern slope.
I know where she's at. Yeah, that just flashed like a big screen TV. It was like I got this picture of a mountain with my hand in front of it, and I just said, I know right where she's at.
It was something you didn't mess with. You know, you didn't doubt him. There was a real strong feeling around him.
It was past midnight when Randy and his friend Frank Smith headed for the mountains.
Randy just looks up there and he goes, she's right up there. He put his hand up there and just pointed to her exactly in a certain area on the side of that mountain. He goes, she's right there. She's right there.
At about that same time, Millie was steeling herself for a third night of withering cold.
That night, I gathered up pine needles and just kind of put them all around when I could. I even put some in my hat, helped keep my head warm. I had an extra pair of socks, so I put those on my hands. Because the night was very, very long. It was like minute by minute. You know, the moon come up, and you watch and watch, and pretty soon the moon goes down, and then it gets colder. When the moon goes down, it got dampish, and it was cold, real cold.
The next day, Randy and Frank were up at the crack of dawn. Their first stop, the Search Command Center.
But it was a little strange because they all kind of looked at us like, who are these guys? Because we didn't have the orange vests and all the fancy search gear that they had. It was just a couple of scruffy-looking cowboys with long-eared mules.
It was a job, and it was just something that we were going to do. There was absolutely no guessing or anything. He knew where she was at, and we're going to go get her.
By now, Millie hadn't seen food or water for 3 days.
I was not real strong at that time. I was shaky, and it was like every step I prayed. And I kept picturing in my mind a glass of cold water and a bathtub.
Randy said that after riding for 45 minutes, he sensed he and Frank were getting close to Millie. They separated to cover a wider area.
Randy just kept going, and I watched him go up. I mean, he was just on a light beam, just straight.
I was kind of thinking, now what do I do? And I saw Randy coming up on the mule. Help! Help! And it was spectacular.
Must be the lady that's lost.
It was just like he appeared there like magic. Just unbelievable. Oh,
there you go.
I really needed that. Thanks a lot.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
I was amazed that she was, after 3 days up there in that cold weather, to see her standing up. I know 3 days with myself out there would have darn sure been tough. And for a lady, she has a lot of spirit.
Thanks to Randy's vision, Millie was now headed down the mountain to safety. At the command center, the sight of Millie created quite a reaction.
Most of the guys kind of stood around speechless, thinking that can't be Mildred. We're still looking for her. We have $1 million worth of equipment out there and resources, and she's coming back to camp on the back of a mule.
I probably looked like I was 100 years old, but it felt great. I don't know why it happened and why Randy was picked, and Frank too, and I pray for them because I think God used them. I don't know any other way of explaining it. I'm not even going to try because that to me feels right.
Coming up, a young woman brings her boyfriend home for the holidays. A week later, she's found dead, and the boyfriend has vanished. Dallas, Texas. We recently told you the story of Dennis Depues, who murdered his ex-wife in Michigan and fled. At around 8:30 on the night of our broadcast, a woman we'll call Mary arrived at her home outside Dallas, Texas. Her boyfriend, Hank Queen, was at home watching the show. Mary still can't believe what happened next.
His van was parked in the driveway, which was out of the ordinary because he usually kept it inside the garage.
Hi, it's good you got that.
He told me that his mother was very ill and that he needed to make an emergency trip home. I was sure that something else must really be going on, but I didn't know what.
Find a man suspected of the brutal murder of his ex-wife.
Aren't you gonna give me a hug?
He just gave me a little peck of a kiss, and I gave him a big hug and said goodbye to him. I realized that something was troubling him, and I knew I would never see him again.
Later that night, Mary was shocked to learn that her boyfriend's name was not Hank Queen. It was really Dennis Depues, and he had just been featured on Unsolved Mysteries. The broadcast described how Dennis Depues arrived at his ex-wife Marilyn's home to pick up their children for a scheduled visit. Dennis erupted into a violent rage. He accused Marilyn of destroying his life and turning their children against him.
We're going to the hospital. You kids stay here.
The next day, Marilyn's body was discovered in a roadside ditch only 9 miles from her home. She had been shot once in the back of the head.
It was so brutal and premeditated that it makes you so angry. If she'd been killed in an automobile accident, you could get over that, but not this.
There was no sign of Dennis Depues for over a year. Until the night of our broadcast.
Looking back on it now, I'm sure he was watching. I think that he was deliberately keeping my attention distracted in the kitchen so that I wouldn't see the segment and so that he could leave.
After the broadcast, a viewer who knew Hank, Queen, and Mary provided the plate number of the van. Police then spotted Depues crossing into Louisiana. He led police on a 15-mile high-speed chase, breaking through 2 barricades before he was stopped.
I told the deputies if the van refused to stop, to shoot a tire off over the front tire. And they missed the front tire, but they got both back ones. He traveled about half a mile and just wouldn't go any further, and he stopped.
Depues fired 2 shots through his windshield and another through his open window. Then he turned the gun on himself and took his own life.
It was a funny feeling to realize that the night before that you had been watching this man, that he was wanted for murder someplace, and then you walk up to the van and you recognize him as being the person that was on Unsolved Mysteries. It's a funny feeling. But I think he intended to die, whether he had to do it by his own hands or where he could get us to kill him.
Kissimmee, Florida, a lakeside resort town about 10 miles south of Orlando. One summer, 22-year-old Paula Pasiak and her boyfriend, Jerry Gervasoni, arrived from New Jersey to visit Paula's mother, Barbara.
They stayed there about 1 week. Paula was as happy as a lark. The 2 of them were. I mean, they were very happy-go-lucky.
During the visit, Paula and Jerry slept in Barbara's bedroom while she slept on a couch.
So do you guys have any plans?
4 nights after they arrived, Paula and Jerry decided to leave for a short excursion to another part of Florida.
Okay, sweetie.
Well, I got up the next morning, and I thought I heard them up. And I didn't know whether they were or not, so I didn't bother to say goodbye. Maybe if I had, things would have been different.
How long has it been this way?
Over the next 5 days, an odd, disturbing smell began to spread through Barbara's mobile
I made
home.
sure to take out all the trash and the garbage.
Well, on Saturday morning, I got up, and by now the odor had really become strong to the point where I had to search around to see what was causing this.
She searched the entire trailer and found nothing. The last place she looked was in her own bedroom. Hidden under the bed, wrapped in a bamboo curtain, was Paula's body.
At first, I wasn't sure of what I seen. And just didn't expect it. I had to stop and think. is this real or am I seeing things?
Paula had been strangled to death and left under the bed for nearly a week. The prime suspect was Jerry Gervasoni, but he had dropped from sight. Less than a month later, authorities got their first break when they questioned a friend of Jerry's. Just 3 days after the murder, he picked up Jerry at the Newark, New Jersey airport. He claimed that Jerry practically confessed to killing Paula.
I don't know what happened. I just freaked out. I lost it. Over what? I needed some quick cash, so I swiped the old lady's paycheck.
What are you doing?
Nothing.
You trying to rip her off?
No.
Then let me see what's in your pocket.
No.
Let me
Don't
see
touch
what's
me.
in your pocket.
Get out of my way.
Show me. You liar. You shut up.
I believe that Jerry has decided that we're no longer looking for him. He's able to roam the streets freely without worry of being arrested.
Update. Jerry Gervasoni was arrested in Canada, where he had been living under the assumed name Gordon McIntyre. When our program aired, his former landlord recognized him and immediately called authorities.
I come home and sit down to dinner about 9:30, quarter to 10, and flip on the TV, and there was this black and white photo of Gordon McIntyre, my tenant.
Gervasoni was extradited to the United States and later tried in Florida. He was convicted of second-degree murder and was given a 17-year sentence. He was released after serving 6 years. Next, two men vanish after cheating friends and neighbors out of nearly $3 million. Medford, Oregon. Lorraine Rondo, who was recently widowed, invested the $100,000 left by her husband. It was all the money she had, and she trusted it to a man named Stephen Cox. A drunk driver left Michelle Witt disabled for life. The insurance company awarded her $75,000. Michelle invested her money with the same man, Stephen Cox. And there were others, 200 others.
And I'm one of the investors who invested with Steve Cox in excess of $100,000.
Altogether, they gave Cox over $3.5 million. Now, Stephen Cox is gone, and so is all that money.
We can get our money back.
Stephen was a local boy, captain of his high school football team, letterman on the basketball team, and named to Oregon's all-state baseball team. He went to college in Oregon, and after he graduated, married his college sweetheart, Deborah. They settled in Medford.
I didn't believe it. No.
Cox started his own company, SD Cox Investments.
When he first began, he had had some luck with commodities, with other investments, gold and silver and other things, and he really wanted to make money for other people. At the same time, he made money for himself.
Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine.
Stephen Cox attracted clients by offering a rate of return as high as 25%. For their cash, investors received an IOU in the form of a promissory note.
The $75,000 was invested, and for 3.5 years, I got a monthly payment of $1,250. He seemed to know what he was doing, and I'm sure he did know what he was doing.
Hey, Gene, good to see you.
Business doubled, then tripled. Cox brought in a partner, Eugene Richmond, who was an old friend.
Well, you know, I'd known Steve since, we were in grade school together. I mean, he was always somebody I looked up to, the high school quarterback of the football team, and, just that typical guy that everybody wanted to know and be around. Basically, whatever Steve Cox asked me to do, I did.
Oh, thank you.
Eugene Richmond was the one that went out and got people to invest their money.
I'm confident that I told every investor that their money is at risk. I would have investors ask me, what happens if SD Cox goes belly up? And I would sit right in my chair and look them straight in the face, and I'd say, you're gonna lose your money.
Well, Eugene Richmond is a liar then, because he never did. Never told us. Not me. Never told me that.
If she was not aware that her money was at risk, then either I failed in my job to tell her that, or, like a lot of people, they didn't want to hear it.
Eugene Richmond never told me that my money was unsafe in any way, that everything was secured. They had money laid aside that they could pay off any one of us.
The cracks, definitely the cracks first.
After only a year in business, SD Cox Investments seemed to be a big success. The firm bought a restaurant, a neighborhood bar, a video arcade, 2 jewelry stores, and an inventory of gems worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
When you have a situation where a local businessman looks successful and other people are going to the bank with the checks, they're making the deposits, that will get around. That facade works. People see the Porsche drive by and their heads turn. People see the Mercedes drive by and they think that guy's successful. They don't realize that maybe that guy is not making ends meet. And he's 2 payments behind on the Porsche.
What happened is Steve Cox had some luck at the very beginning. He had some good fortune. He made some money. And as he continued to pay 22 or 25% interest, he had to get more and more people involved at the bottom in order to be able to do that. It's like a pyramid scheme. There's nothing to back up his promises to pay back this money. That's a house of cards. Eventually it has to fall.
Look, what do we need to do to turn this thing around? Thanks for sticking around.
One Friday, Eugene Richmond told his employees that he and Cox would be out of town on business through Monday. That weekend, Cox cleaned out their office safe, taking over $200,000 in gold, silver, jewelry, and cash. He also took the financial records. Then, Cox and his wife emptied their house and packed their belongings into a rented truck. Along with Eugene Richmond, they snuck out of Medford. 10 months later, the police had a surprise visitor. Stephen Cox's wife, Deborah, returned to Medford and agreed to cooperate with the police.
What was your position with SD Cox Investments? She wasn't actually wanted as far as being a fugitive. We did want to talk to her, but there were no criminal charges pending.
Within a week, Eugene Richmond also surrendered, but he revealed nothing helpful to the investigation.
How much money did you have to live on, and how much did you take with you?
Sergeant Sweeney, concerning that matter, we're not answering those questions today.
The police had enough evidence to charge Eugene Richmond with racketeering. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years. He was released on parole less than 3 years later. Stephen Cox, however, was still missing.
Steve, every day, has to wonder if somebody's going to see him. It's a small world.
Update. After 4 years on the run, Stephen Cox was finally arrested in Lake Mead, Nevada, 25 miles southeast of Las Vegas. He had settled in Boise, Idaho, using an alias. After his story aired on Unsolved Mysteries, he took off. 5 days later, Cox checked into the Lake Mead Lodge Motel.
He was not the normal guest. He stayed in his room all day long. He would only leave at night. Very seldom did he leave in the daytime. And we noticed that the license plates were not the same as he had put down on his registration card. One day when I was out on the grounds, I saw the guest come out of his room. Instead of putting his trash in the bin in front of his room, he took it up to number 35, which was several doors away. And when I went to empty the trash out of that bin, I found the crumpled up letter. And like any curious female, I read the letter. When I read the letter, I saw the part that said something about the Unsolved Mystery show being a bombshell. I showed the letter to my husband, Harold, and between the two of us, we decided it was time definitely to call the Rangers and tell them about the guest.
The next morning, Park rangers spotted Cox's car and pulled him over in the parking lot of a casino.
After we made the traffic stop, he produced identification, a driver's license issued to a Robert Davis. And we checked that name and date of birth through the NCIC computer and found that it was an alias used by one Stephen Cox and that there was a warrant for Mr. Cox. At that point, we placed him under arrest. When we looked in the passenger compartment of the vehicle and in the trunk, we found luggage filled with jewelry, rings, necklaces, collector-type baseball cards, some gold coins, silver coins. And I was really very curious to know why he had it in the vehicle and if, in fact, this was the stuff that he was wanted for taking in the first place.
Stephen Cox was extradited back to Oregon, where he was sentenced to 20 years for racketeering and securities fraud. The valuables in his possession were found to be worth close to $1 million. They were used by the courts to pay back part of what he had stolen from his investors in Medford. He was paroled after serving 2 years. Next, at the age of 5, a World War II refugee gets a new life in America. Will he ever see his family again? Plymouth, England. After World War II, refugees from Eastern Europe searched for a better life in the West. A Polish couple, Helena and Apolinary Kurowski, sent their son Christopher off to America to live with another family. Christopher was only 5 years old. He would never see his parents again. Helena had spent 6 years in a German POW camp. Near the end of the war, she escaped. She was crossing the border into Austria, and then...
Would you like a ride to the town? You look very tired.
She decided that she would let this man help her. And he took her to where all the Polish people were, looked after her, did things for her that nobody had done for her since the war had been going on. Her heart was beginning to come alive again, something it hadn't done since the war had happened.
I am Apollinaire.
Helena. And he asked her to marry him, and so she said yes.
Helena began a new life with Apolinary Kurowski. They stayed on in Austria even after the war was over. There, they adopted an infant and named him Christopher. Within a month, the Kurowskis joined thousands of war survivors in refugee camps in England. Their daughter Michelle was born. Christopher finally had a sister to play with.
My only memory of Christopher is a real happy memory. He would run around me, hide behind me, and all of a sudden he'd come around to the front and he'd go, boo. And I'd laugh, and I can still remember to this day the giggles.
Like so many other refugees, Helena and Apolinary dreamed of a better life for themselves and their children. They applied for visas to the United States, but faced a long wait. Another Polish family living in the camp had just gotten their visas.
Oh, congratulations, my friend.
They offered to take Christopher with them.
He will play with my children, he will go to school, and soon you will be going to America yourself.
The decision was made. Christopher would go on ahead of his family so he could start the first grade in the United States.
I'll miss you, Mama.
I'll miss you too, Christopher.
My mother didn't really want to send him with somebody else, but my father kept saying, you know, education. Education, he's going to get a good education. He's going to be able to start school. So it was easier for him. But my mother, I guess being a woman, it just tore at her heart.
Eventually, Helena and Apolinary chose not to move to America. But the family who had taken Christopher refused to send him back to England.
Yes, they don't send Christopher back.
My parents got a letter back from the family in the United States saying that Christopher had already settled in school, had made friends, and they weren't going to send him back.
I do something. I do something. Helena and Apollinaire immediately went to the refugee camp's Polish consul.
They cannot do this to us.
He was sympathetic, but all of Christopher's adoption records had gone to the United States. That made it nearly impossible to bring the boy back. Michelle moved to the United States as an adult. After Apollinaire died, Helena finally came to America herself. Helena's dying wish was that her children would someday be reunited. Update. The night of our broadcast, millions of viewers watched Unsolved Mysteries. One of them was Christopher's sister from his American family. She called Christopher, and he called us. A month later, Christopher traveled from his home in New York to Michelle's home in Texas.
As I was waiting for Christopher to come and I was looking out the window, I was wanting my mum to be here and wishing that she was here because she had dreamed of this.
Hi. It's been a long time. You did it.
I can't believe this.
I can't describe it. It's too much for words. All these years wondering, hoping, and it's finally come true.
I never expected it to really happen, but I always dreamed that maybe one day my turn will come and I would find my brother. But dreams, I guess they do come true.
Derek, how you doing?
After 44 years, Michelle and Christopher were finally reunited. They also experienced the joy of meeting each other's children and grandchildren. Helena's dying wish was fulfilled.